I find it really sad as a New Zealander to be here seeking international support.
So when I think about the situation that you're going through right now, that you're under attack, I just felt sick and, to be honest, disgusted.
He spoke the truth. He's always spoken the truth. And that's the trouble. They can't handle the truth. Where's the government in this?
I'm Allan Halse. I'm the Director of CultureSafe New Zealand. CultureSafe New Zealand is a anti-workplace bullying organisation that was set up in March 2014. It was set up as a result of me having worked as a union delegate for a major local government in New Zealand, and I was a whistleblower. I supported bullied workers, and I supported 71 bullied workers as a union delegate in my last 2 years working for that organisation. I was suspended and dismissed for supporting those bullied union members. I found myself supported by a lot of those 71 bullied workers, and they came up with the idea of setting up CultureSafe New Zealand. They did that because there was a massive vacuum in New Zealand. We had unions who only represent 18% of our workers, so 82% of New Zealand workers have no representation. So on the one hand, we had the unions who didn't really understand workplace bullying, and on the other side, we had employers who not only didn't understand workplace bullying, they represented bullied workers, it seemed, primarily for profit. So at the time, as a union delegate with our members, we looked hard to firstly try to get our union to support bullied workers, and we belonged to the Public Service Association, which is New Zealand's biggest public service union, and they didn't understand bullying. In fact, a paid union organiser told me 3 years before I set up CultureSafe that I knew more about health and safety and workplace bullying than anybody employed by the union. And that was 3 years before. That was before I started doing my research overseas. And I looked to try to bring the topic of workplace bullying into the public arena. So March 2014, CultureSafe set up. It was created by probably 20 of the former union members that I'd been supporting. They set up the website, they set up the Facebook page, they set up my LinkedIn, and they basically said, there you go, Alan, go and sort it out. Go and fill that big vacuum out there. And I'd never intended to be in that space. So they put me in this big, huge vacuum where there was nobody raising public awareness, there was nobody lobbying, and there was no about creating a public profile about bullying as a problem in New Zealand. And I can tell you in 2014, you wouldn't have found 2 articles about workplace bullying in all our media. And so my thought was, create public awareness and people will do something to stop it. And I thought mine was a 1-year project. I thought naively that if people were aware how insidious and dangerous this problem is, they would do something about it. And I had the statistics from the Healthy Workplace Group in New Zealand, who in 2009 did a big survey and found that New Zealand had 20% of its workforce bullied, and that had made us developed world for bullying. So we knew there was a problem, but nobody was talking about it, and it was pretty much New Zealand's last taboo. It took us a long time to address domestic violence. That kind of took place 20 years before CultureSafe was started, but we were slow dealing with things that are kind of behind closed doors. So in the first 2 years of CultureSafe, I would have appeared 40 times in the media. I was involved in a workplace bullying documentary. I was involved in current affairs programs. I was on our national news. I got massive public exposure. And at the same time, I started supporting bullied workers. Initially, there was just me doing it, and then I built up to the stage where we had 3 full-time employees. We started winning cases, and we started winning cases because, one, because we were really good at what we did and our understanding, but we won cases because the cases were so bad. We had people who were in the mental health system, and we've recently done research that show that 89% of our clients, when they engage our services, are suffering depression, anxiety, or have post-traumatic stress disorder. 50% of our clients experience suicide ideation, and a shocking 9% have attempted suicide. So when you consider that I've personally supported more than 1,000 bullied workers, the numbers are pretty horrific. There's no one in New Zealand in a position of authority, so no government department or agency that will intervene and stop the bullying. No one. We don't have workers' compensation for those that have been injured from the psychological harm that they've experienced. So you end up with a double whammy. So the double whammy is, in a career and you're being bullied and you know that you're suffering harm, you have to stay in that environment because your alternative is to leave your job, your career, and your livelihood, and you end up with nothing, which is why New Zealanders attempt suicide and commit suicide, because their options are either to stay in that toxic environment, become more unwell, or to face financial ruin. So suicide becomes an option. So that's the current situation. Now, we believe it should be addressed as a health and safety issue, which it is. It's about people's, not only their mental health and well-being, but their physical health and well-being. I didn't kind of go through a university and learn this. I've learned everything mainly from my clients and mainly through the people that I've had the fortune to work with. And I was fortunate to attend the NAMI's Workplace Bullying University in San Francisco in January 2017. And so I've learned from the best. And I now am in a position where I know and understand what's going on. Now, that's kind of a bit of a backdrop to where I came from and how I become, I guess, although an unwilling participant, I realized after a while that I knew things that other people didn't. And I'm now 70 years old, so I've got life experience that is significant. I've worked for 53 years of my life. I've worked not only in New Zealand, but Australia, UK, and parts of Europe. So I've got a reasonable perspective on life, and I've seen good work environments. So I know what New Zealand has normalised is not necessarily good. Now, don't get me wrong, we do have good employers in New Zealand, and we do have good lawyers. The sad thing is I never see them because I'm dealing with the other end of the spectrum. Now, because we started to be really successful, and we've won the 3 biggest workplace bullying cases in New Zealand, and that's me as a non-lawyer up against lawyers. And not only just lawyers, we're talking about partners in the biggest law firms in the land. And we win them, and I say that to our clients because our clients are telling the truth, they're sharing their lived experience. But even the cases we win, it's not because the Employment Relations Authority understands what bullying is. We win them by demonstrating that the employer has failed in process. So we have an Employment Relations Act that was passed in New Zealand in the year 2000. So it's 22 years old. It's so far out of date, it doesn't reflect bullying at all. We take a injured worker, somebody that suffered harm, and we put them into an adversarial litigation where the lawyer for the other side does their very best to basically bully them into submission, so they either give up their case or they suffer more harm. Now, even our former Minister of Justice and former Minister of Workplace Relations and Safety, Andrew Little, who Dr. Gary Namies met, even he has acknowledged publicly that the ERA process is adversarial for any employee, any worker who takes their case there. So they know it's unsafe. I've been very vocal about my concern about the unsafe Employment Relations Authority, and in 2017 I made representations to the chief of the Employment Relations Authority and the minister at the time. Minister was Ian Lees-Galloway, was the Minister of Workplace Relations and Safety, and I said that the ERA should not be dealing with workplace bullying cases, and I believe that the chief executive should resign because he's not able to do the job in respect to workplace bullying cases. So be clear, the ERA can do other things reasonably well. They know how to deal with people that have been underpaid and not given holiday leave and those things, but they certainly can't address workplace bullying. So I raised concerns at a very high level with government. What I raised was published, so my concerns were in the media. So in November 2017, after I really started to ramp up my CultureSafe lobbying in Parliament, a lawyer in a case in Auckland put CultureSafe's name on a record of settlement. Now you call them NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. We call them our MB records of settlement, but they are a non-disclosure agreement. So we were at mediation, resolving a case between a bullied worker and the employer. Now, the lawyer for the employer put CultureSafe's name on that document. We weren't a party to it. We didn't sign it. But about 6 months later, 7 months later, the head of the ERA, the same man that I said should resign or be sacked, he found me guilty without a hearing, one day after being approached by the lawyer, and subsequently they imposed penalties of $30,000, fines of $3,000, and costs of $10,000, based on a contract that we weren't a party to and didn't sign. It's really hard to realize that we didn't understand what was going on until sometime after that. Naively, we tried to, I guess, with no money, and so for 4 years, we are still attempting to get back to a judicial review to look at that original decision. Now, how can anybody be held liable for a contract they're not a party to and didn't sign? So what's happened is the lawyers have cunningly taken litigation and they've layered on top of that original decision. And now they talk about the penalties and the fines, and they are desperate to stop us judicially reviewing that original decision of the authority, because we know we could win. Now, that happened in 2018, that they used the November 2017 record of settlement, non-DA, settlement, mediation between a client and an employer. And this happened in Hamilton. The previous one was in Auckland. In Hamilton, the lawyer for the employer did exactly the same thing with exactly the same result. And once again, we were, I guess, out-litigated. So effectively, for the last 4 years, CultureSafe and myself have been attempting to defend ourselves against litigation. And I know that more than $1 million has been spent. So the real kicker to me is that these employers that are coming after us are using taxpayer funds that's meant for the health budget. It's health budget funds meant to support the health of New Zealanders. So $1 million of health budget money has been spent against a small private company of 4 people whose sole goal is to support bullied workers. Now, our media won't talk about what's happening for me and for our small team. And to be honest, if I wasn't concerned about the bullied workers in New Zealand and our current 128 clients, I'd have packed my bags and left this scene a long time ago. It's unhealthy. It's been detrimental to my own health. I have, believe it or not, a heart problem, and I take medication for that. I know that this has exacerbated my own health harm. People have told me to get up and go away. And I keep saying, until we have somebody or some organisation or somebody there to support New Zealand's bullied workers, I have to continue doing it. Because if I get bullied out of supporting bullied workers, what message is that going to send to those bullying employers? Now, I find it really sad as a New Zealander to be here seeking international support for New Zealand workers. I find it a bit embarrassing, because New Zealand is a beautiful country, but we were a good employer. We were a country that I used to be extremely proud of. I never witnessed bullying of any kind until late 1980s, early 1990s. So in 91, the then Conservative government, I'll call it, introduced the Employment Contracts Act, which basically destroyed unions. So we went from compulsory unionism to unions trying to survive in a really hostile environment. And the Employment Relations Act 2000 came about to address the Employment Contracts Act and what it had done, but it hasn't addressed it. Our unions haven't mobilised well. They deal with some issues well, but they have completely ignored the bullying problem. And the bullying problem is the cause of most of the other problems that they've got with employers, because employers are overworked, they're under-resourced, they're not provided with adequate training. Yeah, New Zealand's in a sad situation. We're in a really difficult situation. And last Tuesday, so a week ago today, I was in the Hamilton High Court, which is only 2 kilometres down the road from my office, and basically fighting for the existence of CultureSafe and myself, because these 2 employers, and I'm going to name who they are, it's Turiki Healthcare from Auckland and Rangiuru Trust Board, who run a rest home in Pataru. Their lawyers were attempting to litigate CultureSafe New Zealand and bankrupt me I don't owe anybody any money, and I pay my way. And I mentioned before, I'm 70 years old. I'm a extremely law-abiding citizen, and these people are making me out as something that I'm not. And as anybody that understands bullying knows, the bullies create a different narrative. They try to discredit and make you into somebody you're not. Now, I refuse, and I've told every judge this, and I've told every authority member this, and I tell everybody this. I am not going to stop speaking up when we have suicidal clients. I'm not going to stop naming the employers that do that if they don't address the problem. It's one thing if they do address, but if they address bullying, we don't see them. So we never see the good employers. And I think that's a sad thing, because I'd actually like to talk more about our good employers, but we don't see them. But what we're seeing is a real issue with employers who are dedicated to silencing the only voice that our 580,000 New Zealand workers have. So we're a small country. There's only 5 million of us, and 20% of our workforce equates to about 580,000 workers. So our workers deserve better. We've got really good health and safety legislation. So the Health and Safety at Work Act, that it's called the Health and Safety at Work Act 2015, but it's confusing because it came into effect on the 4th of April 2016. But that act talks about mental health. For the first time, they introduced mental health into the definition of health. So it used to say that health was physical, but now it says health, definition of health is physical and mental health. So everything in that legislation covers psychosocial harm, but our health and safety regulator, WorkSafe New Zealand, has never prosecuted a single psychosocial harm case, and they came into existence in November 2013. And just briefly before I finish, the Health and Safety at Work Act was brought into New Zealand because of a physical health harm accident back in the year 2010 in New Zealand, Pike River Mine. And those deaths should never have occurred. The mine was unsafe. Workers were basically forced to work in an unsafe environment. Nobody was prosecuted. Our own health and safety regulator at the time, the precursor of WorkSafe, they hadn't done their job. So the legislation, the Health and Safety Work Act 2015 and WorkSafe were introduced to lift the standard of our health and safety response. It simply hasn't worked, because we picked up what Australia were doing. We looked for a good model. Australia has a much better way of addressing both physical and psychosocial harm than we do. But we picked up and superimposed a piece of legislation and an organisation that was meant to address that new legislation. And when you just replicate something off the shelf and you haven't actually helped create, you're not invested in it, and they don't understand. And at our top level, our Ministry of Innovation and Employment, MB, I know we talk a lot about MB, they simply don't understand what bullying is. Our politicians don't understand. Our lawyers and employers either don't understand or they're willfully blind. And I know that in America in particular, being willfully blind is an offence. I just feel sad that in 2022, I'm sitting here talking to people from overseas, trying to get support to help educate New Zealanders to understand just how harmful workplace bullying is. So thank you for your time, and I appreciate being interviewed today.
Thank you, Alan. I know you so well. I've heard the story in bits and pieces in different contexts over the years in our growing, increasingly closer relationship between our work here in the US and the Workplace Bullying Institute and CultureSafe New Zealand. But I've never heard it so precisely, concisely, and beautifully put, where you went from beginning to not end. I don't want this to be the end of CultureSafe. And that's why I'm sitting here today talking to the people of New Zealand, particularly the politicians. We have nothing in America but feckless politicians, and we seem to be world famous for it. But when I traveled to New Zealand in 2018 to participate in the CultureSafe conference, there were politicians that he had invited who stood up on the dais and spoke eloquently about the need to stop workplace bullying. Obviously, great prose, very little action, but that's okay. I still thought them even speaking it was miles ahead of what we're doing here in the United States. And then I came to know the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, through American television. Yes, she did television guest spots here in the US. And she said, she was asked, well, describe New Zealand to us, because we Americans don't know so much. And she said, I just want you to know us as a compassionate people. And so I went there with that stereotype in 2018. But I heard about the dark underbelly of New Zealand culture. And there's a streak of inbred aggression there, inherent aggression. And of course, a great hostility to Native peoples too. So there's a lot of stuff going on that is not praiseworthy in New Zealand. But we were all there to talk about workplace bullying, and it seemed like a good start. Now, Alan's CultureSafe had already been operating for 4 years at that time. And what I learned was eye-opening to me. As he showed you, the one document, the Employee Relations Authority Act, it created a dispute resolution mechanism. Dispute resolution is code for conflict. Bullying, on the other hand, is not conflict. It's a form of workplace violence. So by its very definition, the ERA, as it's called, is the inappropriate place for resolving any bullying issues. And he knew that, and I knew that, and I went on their TV and said that, and maybe infuriated people to what end, I don't know. But the point is, there's another feature of the ERA besides its inappropriateness. In a section called Section 236, if I remember correctly, Alan can fix me on that. But there is a provision to allow non-lawyers to adjudicate cases, to present cases, to represent employees as advocates. Now, step away from New Zealand. Ruth and I, my own Dr. Ruth and I, founded what became the Workplace Bullying Institute 25 years ago this year. And I am right now immersed in more legal cases than ever. But I'm an American expert witness, which means I work for the attorneys. I'm hired by attorneys on one side or the other, and I've done both sides. Plaintiff side, in other words, the bullied worker side, and the defense side, where the employers wanted support for firing bullies, which is great. And I'm anti-abuse. I'm not anti-employer, so that's fine. But that's the legal limit to what I can do. I'm not going to step into court and represent someone against a cadre of employment law professionals. Now, go back to New Zealand. What Alan has been able to do is actually go into that forum against lawyers, and he wins 70% of the time. He brings his passion, his experience, his knowledge, his union background, and basically, as you heard in that his own self-description, a fighting spirit, an indefatigable spirit that just if we could can it and sell it, we would, and distribute it. We need to save the Allans in this world because they're precious and because they're rare. You don't find people like Allan everywhere. You hardly find them anywhere. And I thought I was the advocate. Yes, I'm an advocate and I do education and I do this and I do that. Yeah. I don't go into the court and fight the other lawyers on the other side who have all the resources that the employer can give them. And Allan fights for pennies. He's got a low rate because he's got bullied targets who have mostly been displaced. They're not all destitute, but they're not rich. They're not rich, and many are now unemployed. They don't have sources of income. So he's fighting on their behalf. And when he wins 30, 40, 50, 60,000. But he doesn't win millions like the attorneys I work with. When you're dealing lawyer to lawyer, the unit is in millions, not tens of thousands. So Allan is taking on all this distress, all of this heavy burden on his lone shoulders in that country for peanuts. I don't want to lose Allan. I'm worried about losing Allan. Now wait, there's more. He's got a small staff of super dedicated people, 3 or 4 at most, and they're doing Herculean work. The CultureSafe staff also does it for peanuts. They care much. They have hundreds of cases to deal with. They marshal evidence just as attorneys need to do. They have to make persuasive arguments just as attorneys need to do, but they do it on a shoestring budget. And along comes 2 smart alecky lawyers that decide that they can convince, okay, why do lawyers hate him who have gone up against him? 1, they've been beat. 2, Allan's not in the club. There's actually a club of employment lawyers, an association called ELINZ, E-L-I-N-Z, and they're putting themselves out as advocates to represent individuals in addition to employers for the ERA or the employment court, which is higher level EC, or to just go to mediation services, the MBIE. When he says MB, that's what he's talking about. So those are the 3 government entities. And so how does it begin, the trouble for Allan? It begins he described it best, but there was also a case in which there was a settlement and he got obligated to this silence and say nothing. He complied, but then they lied and said he went on social media and beat us up. Oh, boo-hoo. His tools in his toolkit include social media public relations. He's appealing the court of public opinion for employers. That's what he's doing to offset the vast resources these rich employers have. All right. So the one I'm showcasing right now who's been going after him is this rest home, only 107 employee firm, and RTB, or its initials, and they profess to be all about peace and harmony and goodness and wellness. Crap. Those espoused values are in the trash can because they're the ones pursuing the legal case to collect fees from Allan and from CultureSafe to bankrupt them both and to stop his anti-bullying work. RTB lost their case to Allan and they're mad. He brought 13 employee cases before them and told the public, hey, a firm with 100 workers and I have 13 cases, man, oh man, that is a toxic workplace just by numbers alone, sheer numbers. He spoke the truth. He's always spoken the truth. And that's the trouble. They can't handle the truth. Where's the government in this? The government should not go along with attorneys for these companies, but they have been. They've been hoodwinked. They have given the imprimatur of government acceptance and endorsement to this chase of Allan to drive him into insolvency and bankruptcy. They can't stand having this very effective, prolific, convincing, leading anti-bullying advocate in their midst. So I don't want to hear about New Zealand being a compassionate people. Sam Hood and that attorney Drake, to me, are the exemplars of who New Zealanders are. I used to think it was the All Blacks team, but no, 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 no. It's these legal professionals who are dumping on this good guy and this good cause. If they can't grow up, and the politicians who are saying, but all of the people in these government agencies, albeit government appointed by these ministers who are the politicians, are all good people. Well, that's like, how silly has it been? Like I said, I've been dealing with this bullying phenomenon 25 years. You go ask the supporter, the sponsor, the executive over the bully, well, what do you think of the bully? And you say, I like him. Of course you like him. He's doing your bidding. Shut up. You don't ask for an evaluation of the government, of the ERA officials from the minister who is responsible for appointing the ministers. And by they call them members in the ERA. The people who unilaterally, not a tribunal, they call it a tribunal, but I don't see any three parties. It's one party makes a legally binding determination, and they call them members. Guess what profession they are? They're all lawyers. So there you have it. I've focused on two of the lead lawyers, but as Alan mentioned, the insurance companies have gotten involved. More and more lawyers are dumping and jumping on this case. They're layering lawyer upon lawyer to bankrupt the good guys. So it's not a case of good versus evil, but I think it's good versus bad, and maybe good versus corrupt. Dare I say, bullying organizations are corrupt in the way that they cover up internally, but to bring the government in on it too, come on, Prime Minister Ardern, come on. You want to be known as a compassionate people. You want to be an advanced progressive nation among the Western industrialized nations. Get with the program, make it living embodiment of compassion. Take a look at this case, stop the injustice. Don't let these proceedings go forward. And when and if they actually grant a judicial review in the employment court of the ERA's nonsensical acceptance of the attorney's trumped up charges against him and the falsification of trying to hold him to a contract to which he is not even a party, nor did he sign. If they don't undo the original step, then they're all corrupt too. So it needs to stop. We're watching. Come on, Prime Minister. Come on, politicians. Do something. Don't sit idly by. Doing nothing when bullying is involved is not a neutral act. You either condemn or you condone. So figure it out. It's very obvious from looking from afar, but I'm looking through very experienced eyes, mind you, as is Alan. When you try and strike down the people with the heart and the sense of justice that Allan Halse brings to this cause, you're on the wrong side. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Linda Crockett, and I'm the founder of the Canadian Institute of Workplace Harassment and Violence. And I've been doing this work for almost 11 years now. And Gary Namey is a big part of my training as well, back in the 2012, I believe. And I was very grateful to meet Alan in San Francisco back in 2019, I think it was. Very impressed with Alan. I've stayed connected, watched his work, but I hadn't seen or heard the entire story like I did today when Alan was speaking. And I have to say, I was very touched, very impressed. And man, I wish we had you here. We need you here in Canada as well. We all do different work, but we do similar work. We're all here for the right reasons. We're here to promote psychological safety in all workplaces, in every country, because it's needed in every country. But the skills that I heard you have, man, we need you here. I started this as a not-for-profit this year because I'm sick worried about those people who don't have the money to get the legal help that they need, who don't have the money to get the therapy that they need. Now, my background is a trauma therapist, so my perspective will be coming from the perspective of the injuries that I see. You said that you've seen over 1,000. I've seen thousands of injured workers. I know how damning and how horrible this is. And you talked really well about the physical and psychological injuries that people suffer. So when I think about the situation that you're going through right now, that you're under attack, I just felt sick and, to be honest, disgusted. to hear that anybody would treat someone like you that way. And I have to wonder about what are their intentions. I know that your intentions are to create safety. How could anybody be against that? Any toxic employer, any toxic lawyer, any toxic insurance company that is against you, Allan, against good work that you do to protect injured employees, well, what does that say about them? What does that say about them wanting to shut you down when you do such good work? What does that say about their intentions? Think about it. Why would any healthy, safe employer who supports zero tolerance of workplace bullying or harassment ever want to get in the way of you? It makes absolutely no sense. You're a value. And there's just, I know that you've saved lives. You know, I know that Gary has saved lives. I know that I have saved lives. I know that you're not causing harm, you're preventing it. So what are these lawyers promoting? Is it about money? What are these insurance companies, these employers promoting? Is it money? Is it about the cases that show them up, the mistakes that they have made? Or are they protecting toxicity? Because that's really what happens when they get rid of people like you. It keeps the toxicity going. So I've also been under attack in the work that I do. And I know that, you know, we all probably have stories, but nothing like the nightmare that you're going through, Allan. It is just disgusting. You put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into the work that you do, and you're one of the most kindest people that I have ever met. I've never forgotten the energy that I felt around you and this big heart that you have. And we need people around the world to speak up and support you, because what does that mean if they win? What does that mean for us? Are they coming after us next? And people can't afford to lose us. We're out there pounding the pavement, trying to create legislation and policies and follow through on those policies. So it's important that we get the support, that you get the support you need, because that means we all get that support too. I want to finish my statement by telling you a quick little story. As I was teaching a group of lawyers last week, it's 2022, just like you said. I was astounded to hear the question from a lawyer who said to me, Linda, don't you think by teaching trauma-informed practices to prevent and intervene and repair cases of workplace bullying and harassment that you're making things worse? I was stunned by that question. And if that's the kind of lawyers that are out there practicing, I am worried for those injured employees. If the ones that are attacking you right now have that perspective to shut you down, then I'm worried about those injured employees. They need to understand the impact that they're having. I understand that there's a GoFundMe page for you, and I'm going to be making a donation today. I hope that others will stand up and make a donation. I hope others will speak up and do a video like this and join us, because you deserve the support, and we don't want you going away. We certainly want you to be safe and healthy, Allan, and take care of yourself, but we need a couple of clones before, okay? We need you to be cloned, and we need you to continue doing the work that you're doing.